I never imagined that the boy I raised with love, sacrifice, and sleepless nights would one day stand in front of me with such coldness in his eyes. The crisp autumn air of our quiet suburban street in Ohio felt unusually sharp, each gust of wind a tiny needle against my skin. But the chill wasn't from the weather, it was from the scene unfolding before me. As I stood on the porch of the house I built with my own hands, my son Mark smirked. "You're old and homeless now," he said, his voice dripping with a cruel satisfaction I'd never heard from him before. In his hands was a brand new brass-colored lock set, its packaging discarded on the porch swing my late husband Tom had installed for me on our 40th anniversary. I felt the weight of 68 years pressing down on me, years of rocking him to sleep as a baby with a fever, of working double shifts at the diner to afford his college textbooks, of believing he would be the one to hold my hand when I could no longer navigate the world alone. But instead, he was erasing me from his life, from my own home, as if I were nothing more than a stubborn stain on his pristine future. His wife, Jessica, stood a few feet behind him on the lawn, her arms crossed, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips. I knew she was the serpent in this garden, whispering poison into my son's ear for years, convincing him that my presence was a burden, my home an asset he was entitled to. What Mark didn't know is that I'm not as helpless as I look. He doesn't know about the hidden deeds, the will I changed without telling anyone, the quiet arrangements I made for the day someone would betray me. He thinks he's won, that I have nowhere to go, that he can simply discard his old mother like a piece of worn-out furniture. But soon he will realize that taking my home was his greatest mistake, because I still hold the one thing he desperately needs. Before we continue with my story, I have to mention something strange that's been happening. YouTube has been unsubscribing people from channels without any warning, so please take a quick second to check if you're still subscribed. If not, just hit that subscribe button again so you don't miss how this all unfolds. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to turn, to walk away from the only home I had known for 45 years. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I walked down the familiar cracked sidewalk, past Mrs. Gable's prize-winning roses, and the oak tree where Mark had scraped his knee 100 times as a child. Each step was a memory, and each memory was now a fresh wound. I could feel their eyes on my back, watching me go. I clutched my purse, the only thing I'd managed to grab before Mark had blocked the doorway. Inside was my wallet, my phone, and a small worn photograph of Tom and a much younger, happier Mark. I didn't have a plan, not really, not for tonight. My long-term plan was in place, a complex web spun with the help of a dear old friend, but the immediate shock left me reeling. I couldn't go to my sister's. She lived 3 states away and was frail herself. My friends were my neighbors, and I couldn't bear their pitying glances or the inevitable gossip that would follow. So I did the only thing I could think of. I walked the 2 miles to the nearest commercial strip and checked into a drab, anonymous motel called the Starlight Inn. The name was a cruel joke. There were no stars here, only the flickering neon sign that cast a sickly green glow into my room. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. The bedspread was a faded floral pattern, rough and starchy against my skin. It was a world away from my home, with its soft quilts, the scent of lavender from the garden, and the comforting creak of the floorboards. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, the silence of the room amplifying the roaring in my ears. The image of Mark's face, twisted into a mask of contempt, was burned into my mind. How did we get here? I thought back to the sacrifices. When Tom died 10 years ago, the grief was a physical blow, but I knew I had to be strong for Mark. He was just finishing his MBA, and I used a significant portion of Tom's life insurance to pay off his student loans, so he could start his life debt-free. I never once thought of it as a loan. It was a gift. It was what a mother does. When he met Jessica a few years later, I welcomed her with open arms. She was polished and ambitious, and if she made Mark happy, I was happy. But slowly things began to change. The weekly Sunday dinners became monthly, then stopped altogether. My calls would go to voicemail. When I did see them, Jessica would make subtle digs. "Oh Sarah, this old house is just so much work for you. You should think about a nice simple apartment." Mark would just nod along, avoiding my eyes. They started talking about investments and leveraging assets. I didn't understand the jargon, but I understood the greed shimmering in their eyes. They weren't seeing a family home, they were seeing a dollar sign. They were seeing a stepping stone to the lavish lifestyle Jessica so desperately craved. The final straw had been my refusal to co-sign a loan for a risky business venture. Mark wanted to start. "It's too much of a gamble, honey," I had told him gently. "Your father always said never to risk the roof over your head." He had stormed out, his face dark with anger. "It's my future, Mum. You're holding me back," he'd shouted. I see now that he wasn't just angry, he was plotting. He and Jessica had decided that if I wouldn't give them what they wanted, they would simply take it. A single tear finally escaped and traced a cold path down my cheek. I wasn't just mourning the loss of my house, I was mourning the loss of my son. The sweet boy who brought me dandelions and promised to slay dragons for me was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating stranger. Wiping the tear away with the back of my hand, a new feeling began to bubble up through the grief: resolve. They had underestimated me. They saw a frail old woman, easy to push aside. They had forgotten that I was Tom Miller's wife, and Tom Miller never ever went into a fight unprepared. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My fingers trembled slightly as I scrolled through my contacts, past my sister, until I found the name I was looking for: David Chen. David had been Tom's lawyer, his best friend since college, and the executor of our estate. After Tom passed, David became my rock, my confidant. He was the only other person in the world who knew the truth about Tom's will and the intricate legal fortress he had built around our assets. I pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and steady, a welcome anchor in my storm. "Sarah, is everything all right? It's late." I took a deep breath, steadying my own voice. "David," I said, the words coming out stronger than I expected. "It's happened. Mark kicked me out. He's changing the locks on the house." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, not of surprise, but of grim acceptance. Tom had predicted this. He had seen the latent greed in Mark, a trait he had always worried about. "I see," David said, his voice low and serious. "The contingency plan is in motion then. Are you safe, Sarah?" "I'm at the Starlight Inn on Route 42, I replied, a wave of relief washing over me. I wasn't alone in this. "What's the first step?" "The first step," David said, and I could almost hear the quiet determination in his tone, "is for you to get a good night's rest. I'll handle everything on my end tonight. We'll meet at my office tomorrow morning at 10. They've sprung the trap, Sarah. Now we watch them get caught in it." Hanging up the phone, I felt a flicker of the old fire that Tom had always said he admired in me. Mark and Jessica thought they were playing a simple game of chess, callously removing an old queen from the board. They had no idea they were walking into a minefield. They wanted the house. They could have it, for now, but they had just triggered a series of events that would unravel their entire world, and I would be there to watch it happen. The brass lock on my front door wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. The next morning, the sun streamed through the grimy motel window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I had barely slept, my mind a whirlwind of memories and anxieties. But underneath the turmoil, David's words had planted a seed of strength. I wasn't just a victim, I was a player in a game that had been set up years ago. Dressed in the clothes from the day before, trying to smooth out the wrinkles, and took a taxi to David's office. David's law firm, Chen and Associates, wasn't in a flashy downtown skyscraper. It was in a beautifully restored brownstone in a quieter, historic part of the city. The interior was filled with dark wood, shelves of leather-bound books, and the hushed, respectful silence of old money and deep knowledge. It was the kind of place that exuded permanence and stability, a stark contrast to my current chaotic reality. David greeted me with a warm hug, his face etched with concern. He was a man in his late 60s like me, with kind eyes and a presence that was both gentle and formidable. He led me into his personal office, a corner room overlooking a small manicured garden. "Tea, Sarah?" he asked, already pouring from a porcelain pot. "Chamomile. Tom always said it was the only thing that could calm your nerves after one of Mark's childhood disasters." A sad smile touched my lips. I remember, like the time he tried to build a rocket in the garage and nearly set the whole thing on fire. "Exactly," David said, handing me the cup. "He was always ambitious, that boy." Tom admired his drive but worried about his lack of patience. "He wants the penthouse without climbing the stairs," Tom used to say. David sat down behind his large mahogany desk, his expression turning serious. "Tom saw this coming, Sarah. Maybe not this exact scenario, this level of cruelty, but he knew Mark's character, and he knew Jessica's. That's why he structured everything the way he did." He slid a thick leather-bound portfolio across the desk towards me. The title was embossed in gold letters, "The Thomas and Sarah Miller Family Trust. Mark thinks the house was willed to you, and upon your death, it passes to him." "Simple, clean," David explained. "That's what the copy of the will I was instructed to give him says. It's legally valid, but it's not the whole story. It's the decoy." He opened the portfolio. Inside were dozens of pages filled with dense legal text, diagrams and signatures. "This," he said, tapping the top page, "is the master document. The house, the investment portfolio, the savings, everything Tom and you built, is in this trust. You are the primary beneficiary and the life tenant of the property, but you are also a co-trustee, along with me." My head was spinning slightly. Tom had tried to explain it all to me years ago, but my eyes had glazed over at all the legal talk. I trusted him, and I trusted Dill. That was enough for me then. Now, I needed to understand every word. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "It means you have the right to live in that house, undisturbed for the rest of your life. It is your home," David said, his voice firm. However, Tom, in his foresight, included several protective clauses. The most important one is Clause 11b, the bad faith occupancy clause. He pointed to a specific paragraph. It states that if any potential beneficiary, in this case Mark, attempts to forcibly or unlawfully remove the life tenant or take possession of the property against your will, two things happen immediately. First, the property automatically reverts to the full control of the trust, nullifying your life tenancy, but also any future claim he has on the property itself. Second, his status as a beneficiary is suspended, and all his access to any trust funds is frozen, pending a unanimous review by the trustees. I stared at him. "A unanimous review, by you and me?" David nodded slowly. "Precisely. By kicking you out, Mark didn't just make himself homeless in the long run. He locked himself out of his entire inheritance. He just doesn't know it yet." The sheer brilliance of it, the quiet, posthumous protection from my husband, filled me with a profound sense of gratitude and sorrow. Tom had loved our son, but he had also seen his flaws with unflinching clarity. He had built a fortress to protect me, not from a stranger, but from our own child. So what Mark thinks is his greatest triumph is actually his financial self-destruction, I murmured, the pieces clicking into place. "Completely," David confirmed. "He and Jessica are probably celebrating right now, thinking they've won a house worth, what, $500,000. In reality, they've lost access to a portfolio worth 10 times that." This was the part I had remembered, the part I was counting on. This was the one thing Mark desperately needed. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the access, the power, the status he and Jessica craved. Mark had a job, but it was a mid-level management position that didn't support the lavish lifestyle Jessica paraded on social media, the designer bags, the luxury car leases. They were living far beyond their means, likely propped up by the allowance from the trust fund that Mark received monthly, an allowance he thought was just a gift from his loving mother. "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice steadier. David leaned forward, a strategic glint in his eye. "Now we let them get comfortable, let them move their things in, let them hang their pictures on the walls, let them feel like they've truly won. Then in about a week, my office will send an official notice to the property, addressed to current occupants. It will inform them that they are illegally trespassing on property owned by the Miller Family Trust, and that they have 30 days to vacate before legal proceedings for eviction are filed. It will also inform Mark that his beneficiary status has been suspended. We do it all by the book, cold, impersonal, and legally airtight." The thought of their smug faces when they read that letter brought a grim satisfaction that I was almost ashamed to feel. But they had inflicted this wound, they had chosen this path. If you're enjoying this story of a mother's quiet revenge, do me a quick favor and hit the like button below. It really helps the channel out. I spent the rest of the morning with David, going over the documents. He arranged for a suite at a comfortable long-stay hotel, paid for by the trust of course. He also advanced me a sum of cash for daily expenses. "The trust is designed to protect and provide for you, Sarah," he reminded me. "Tom made sure of that. You are not homeless. You are simply temporarily relocated." Leaving his office, I felt like a different woman than the one who had stumbled into the motel the night before. The shock had been replaced by a cold, clear purpose. This wasn't just about getting my house back. In fact, I wasn't sure I even wanted it back anymore. The memories were now tainted by Mark's betrayal. This was about teaching my son a lesson that I had clearly failed to teach him as a child, that actions have consequences, and that greed is a rot that destroys everything it touches. For the next few days, I lived in a strange limbo. I bought new clothes, took long walks in a nearby park, and tried to piece together what my future might look like. I drove by my old street once. From a distance, I saw Jessica's expensive SUV in my driveway. I saw new gaudy curtains in the windows. They were erasing me, just as they planned. But I knew that the victory was a mirage. They were celebrating on a ship they had already sunk. They were redecorating a house that was no longer, and would never be, theirs. And the iceberg, in the form of a legally binding letter, was already in the mail. The week passed in a blur of quiet solitude. I settled into the rhythm of my new, temporary life at the hotel. I started a journal, went to the local library, and even attended a yoga class for seniors. I was slowly rebuilding a life for myself, separate from the identity of Mark's mother or Tom's widow. I was just Sarah, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like it might be enough. Meanwhile, I could only imagine the scene at my old house. I pictured Mark and Jessica, drunk on their perceived success. I imagined them walking through the rooms, deciding which of my treasured belongings to sell, which to throw away. I could almost hear Jessica's sharp voice, "This old armchair has to go, and this hideous wallpaper. We'll paint everything grey, a nice modern grey." They would be so wrapped up in their shallow triumph, so certain of their cleverness. David called me on Friday morning. The letter was delivered and signed for at 10:15 a.m., he said, his voice calm and professional. "The clock starts now." I thanked him and hung up, my heart pounding a little faster. The trap had been sprung. At what used to be my home, Mark was likely at work, but Jessica would have been there to receive the certified letter. I could picture her, annoyed at the interruption, signing for the envelope from a law firm she didn't recognize. She'd probably tear it open carelessly, expecting a solicitation or a bill, and then she would read it. I imagined her perfectly made-up face paling, her eyes scanning the dense legal paragraphs with growing panic. Words like unlawful occupation, trespassing, property of the Miller family trust, and immediate suspension of beneficiary status would leap off the page. The foundation of their smug little world would crack right then and there. She would call Mark, her voice shrill with hysteria. "What is this? What have you done?" My phone rang late that afternoon. The caller ID flashed, Mark. I let it ring 4 times, then took a deep, centering breath and answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Hello, Mum? What is this? What did you do?" he demanded, his voice a frantic, high-pitched mess. The arrogant, cold man from the porch was gone, replaced by a panicked boy. "I'm not sure what you're talking about, Mark," I said calmly, picturing David nodding his approval. "This letter, from some lawyer. It says we're trespassing. It says my trust fund is frozen. This is your house. You have to call them and fix this," he sputtered. "My house?" I repeated, letting a touch of icy sadness into my voice. "I thought you told me I was old and homeless now. I don't believe I have a house anymore according to you. You were very clear about that when you were changing the locks, remember?" There was a stunned silence on his end. "Mum, that was a misunderstanding," he stammered, the lie sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "Jessica and I were just worried about you. We thought it would be better if we looked after the property for you, to keep you safe." The audacity of the lie was almost breathtaking. "You thought changing the locks and telling me I was homeless was your way of keeping me safe?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "That's an interesting approach to eldercare, Mum. I don't think AARP would endorse it." "This isn't funny, Mum. My money is frozen. We need that money. Jessica just bought new furniture. We're having the whole interior repainted next week," he whined, the true source of his panic finally spilling out. "It wasn't about me. It wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was about the money. It had always been about the money." "That sounds like a personal problem, dear," I said, using the same dismissive tone Jessica so often used with me. "You see, you made a choice. You chose to believe that my home, the home your father and I built, was just an asset for you to liquidate. You chose to throw me out onto the street. You didn't know about the trust your father set up, did you?" He was a very smart man. He knew that sometimes the biggest threat to a family's legacy is the family itself. I could hear Jessica shouting in the background. "What is she saying? Tell her to fix it, Mum." "Mum, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Just tell me what to do. I'll apologize. I'll do anything. We can't lose this house." "It was never your house to lose," I stated, the finality of the words hanging in the air. "You have 30 days to vacate the property before the trust's attorneys begin formal eviction proceedings. I'd suggest you stop buying furniture and start packing boxes. I have nothing more to say to you, Mark." And with that, I hung up. I sank onto the hotel sofa, my body trembling with a mixture of adrenaline, sorrow, and a strange liberating sense of power. The first crack in their perfect world had appeared, and it was a chasm. The arguments that would be happening in that house now would be epic. Jessica, whose entire identity was tied to the wealth she thought she had secured, would turn on him like a cornered animal. His clever plan had not only failed, but had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. He hadn't just lost the house, he'd lost the golden goose. Over the next few weeks, the fallout was exactly as David and I had predicted. Mark called me dozens of times, leaving a string of increasingly desperate voicemails. They ranged from angry and threatening to pitiful and begging. I didn't answer. He and Jessica hired a lawyer, who, after a brief review of the trust documents provided by David, likely told them they didn't have a legal leg to stand on. Their only move was to appeal to my good graces, but they had burned that bridge and salted the earth behind them. The best part, a small guilty pleasure, was checking Jessica's social media. Her constant stream of posts about her blessed life, her new beginnings, and photos of her expensive purchases had come to an abrupt halt. The show was over. The curtain had been pulled back to reveal the ugly reality behind the facade. They weren't wealthy heirs taking their rightful place. They were fools caught in a trap of their own making. Their greatest mistake was not just kicking me out. It was underestimating the woman they saw as nothing more than a relic of the past. The house was just the beginning. The real reckoning was yet to come. The 30-day deadline approached like a slow-moving storm cloud over my old neighborhood. The desperation from Mark and Jessica was palpable, even from a distance. Their lawyer had officially confirmed what they feared. The trust was ironclad. Tom and David had constructed a legal fortress that was utterly impenetrable. Their attempts to challenge it were futile and expensive, draining what little savings they had. The life of luxury they had envisioned was evaporating before their eyes. David kept me updated. The new furniture Jessica had ordered was returned, likely incurring a hefty restocking fee. The painters were cancelled. The reality of their situation began to sink in, not as a legal problem they could solve, but as a life-altering catastrophe of their own creation. The hushed, angry phone calls I imagined turned into full-blown, screaming arguments that, according to my old neighbor Mrs. Gable, who called to check on me, could sometimes be heard from the street. The perfect couple was crumbling under the weight of their own greed. On the 29th day, I decided to drive by one last time. It was a grey, overcast afternoon that matched my mood, a mixture of somber vindication and deep sadness. As I turned onto the street, the sight that greeted me was a bitter, poetic justice. A moving truck was parked in the driveway, the same place Jessica's gleaming SUV used to sit. Boxes, hastily taped and labeled in angry black marker, were piled on the lawn. Mark was hauling a sofa out the front door, his face grim, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Jessica was arguing with one of the movers, her face pinched and furious. They were a mirror image of how they must have imagined me leaving, defeated, displaced, and humiliated. I didn't stop, I didn't gloat. I just watched for a moment, a silent observer of the consequences they had wrought, and then drove away. There was no joy in their defeat, only a profound sense of loss for the family we once were. My own future, however, was starting to take shape. I had no desire to move back into that house. The memories were tainted, the rooms haunted by the ghost of my son's betrayal. With David's guidance, we put the house on the market. As per the trust's instructions, the proceeds from the sale would be reinvested into the main portfolio. The trust was not a piggy bank to be smashed, it was a legacy to be managed, and now it was solely my responsibility. I decided to move to a smaller city a few hours away, to a lovely condo complex near the coast of Lake Erie. It was close to my niece, my sister's daughter, a kind, gentle soul who had always treated me with love and respect. It was a new start, a chance to build a life on my own terms. A week after they had vacated the house, David arranged the final meeting. Mark had been begging for it, claiming he needed to talk to me, to apologize in person. I agreed, but not at my hotel, and certainly not alone. We met in the formal conference room at David's office, the long, polished table a barrier between us. Mark looked terrible. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He was dressed in a rumpled suit, a far cry from the confident, arrogant man who had changed my locks. Jessica was not with him. According to David, she had left him a few days after they moved into a cramped rented apartment. Without the promise of wealth, her loyalty had vanished. "Mom," he began, his voice raspy, "I am so sorry. There's no excuse for what I did. It was monstrous. Jessica, she got in my head. She twisted things. I held up a hand, stopping him. "Don't, Mark," I said, my voice even but firm. "Don't blame her. She may have been the catalyst, but the decision was yours. The cruelty was yours. You looked me in the eye and threw me out of my home. That is something you have to own." He flinched, then nodded, looking down at his hands on the table. "You're right. It was me, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I was greedy, and I was stupid." He looked up, his eyes pleading. "But I'm still your son. Is there any way? Can you forgive me? Can you undo this? I need access to the trust. I'm about to lose my job." And there it was, the final piece of the puzzle. "Your job?" I asked. He confessed that he had been trying to leverage his expected inheritance to secure a partnership at his firm. He had made promises, signed preliminary agreements, and assured his bosses that he had significant capital behind him. The one thing he desperately needed from me wasn't just the monthly allowance or the house, it was the entire trust, the proof of wealth he needed to finalize his career-making deal. Without it, he was not only broke, but he was also a fraud in the eyes of his employers. He had gambled his entire professional future on the assumption that he could steal from his own mother. I looked at David, who gave me a subtle, reassuring nod. I took a deep breath. This was the moment I had been rehearsing in my mind for weeks. "Your father loved you very much, Mark," I began, my voice thick with emotion. "But he was not a fool. He saw the path you were on. This trust," I gestured to the portfolio on the table, "wasn't just about protecting me. It was about giving you a chance to find your own way, without the corrupting influence of unearned wealth. He set it up so that your allowance was enough to supplement your income, not replace it. He wanted you to build something of your own, to feel the pride that comes from your own hard work, something I'm not sure you've ever felt." I paused, letting the words sink in. "My love for you, the love of a mother for her child, is unconditional. I will always love the boy I raised, but my respect and my trust are not. You have broken my heart, Mark, but you have not broken my spirit. What you are asking for is not forgiveness. You are asking for a bailout, and the answer is no." He stared at me, his face collapsing in despair. "No, no," I repeated. "The trustees have met. The decision is unanimous. Your beneficiary status will remain suspended indefinitely. However," I continued, "we will not see you on the street. Your father wouldn't have wanted that, and neither do I. The trust will provide a small monthly stipend, paid directly to you. It's enough for a modest apartment and basic necessities. It is not enough for a life of luxury. It is not enough to save your business deal. It is enough for you to survive, while you figure out how to build a real life, from scratch, the way your father and I did." I stood up, my chair scraping softly on the floor. "I hope, one day, you become a man your father would have been proud of. I truly do. But that is a journey you will have to take alone." I turned and walked out of the conference room without looking back, leaving him sitting at that long polished table with the ruins of his life. David followed me out, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. I didn't cry. I felt a profound aching sadness, but also a sense of peace. I had done the right thing. I had honored Tom's wishes, and in a strange way given Mark the only real chance he had at redemption, a life he had to earn for himself. Before you go, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button to catch more stories like mine. Every subscriber helps our community grow. As David drove me back to my hotel, I looked out the window. The city lights seemed brighter somehow. I had lost a son, but I had reclaimed myself. The next day, I would pack my bags and head towards the lake, towards my niece, towards my new beginning. I was not the old and homeless woman my son had tried to make me. I was Sarah Miller, and for the first time in a very long time, I was free.